Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sparta-Town. Thank you for joining. My name is Farzin. I'm the development manager of Spartacus and your host today. We are super excited and happy to have you on our third episode. We would love to share with you some of our technical experiences and give you a little bit update about what's going on in Spartacus. Looking at the status today, we have over 1,400 community member. Last time when we met was in November. We had 1,200, which is a good progress. 200 people joined the community. Welcome on board, and we hope to have more people. We are looking at our documentation. Just in January, we had over 25,000 page views in our documentation. That's a big number, and it's just only for 1 month. That helps us to see if you're interested and if you're reading, if you're missing anything. Please share your feedback. We're happy to add more content to our documentation. And obviously, our source of truths are code. We have over 320 stars already, and it's growing. Thank you for contributing. We have different channels for communication on Twitter, Facebook, Slack, GitHub, YouTube, and we're recently planning and started moving to Stack Overflow. If you like the project, if you wanted to hear more about the project, please follow us. Please click on the like button. That gives the visibility to Spartacus project, and then also you can get information in constant space. We also have set up a schedule of all of their sessions for the first half of the year. Every month we have one online session. One month is Spartacus webinar. The other month is Sparta-Town. The focus of a Sparta-Town is pretty much the sharing technical experience. And the focus of a Spartacus webinar is sharing the status, the more detailed status of the project. Our next session is March 5th. That's for Spartacus webinar. In this particular session, Sparta-Town episode 3, we're going to tackle two technical topics. We're going to start with Gil, which is our technical lead at the project. Gil is going to walk you through our experience using Cypress for continuous testing strategy. Then I play a video by Bill. He's traveling today. He could not attend this session. A 5-minute overview about the status and the recent release of Spartacus. And finally, Tobias is the lead architect of the Spartacus project, is going to give you a deep dive to deferred loading. At any point of time, please feel free to leave your comment, question in the chat session, and one of our team members will be happy to answer you. With no further ado, I'll pass it to Gil. Take it over, Gil.
Thank you, Farzin. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm going to talk a little about Cypress. I'm trying to share my screen. All right. So the name of the session is Continuous Testing with Cypress. So there's my contact information. Well, there's my name. My name is Gilberto Alvarado. I am the technical leader and release master for the Spartacus team. So let's get started. This is what briefly I'm gonna talk about. So I'm going to start with Protector because that's pretty much what led us to adopt Cypress. I'm going to speak a little about Cypress, what it is, how it works, good things and bad things based on our experience on the Spartacus project, and also a couple of small demos of it. When we started the Spartacus project like a year and a half ago, pretty much, we started doing our end-to-end testing in Protractor. The reason pretty much basically because it is the Angular standard, it ships with it. They use it. A lot of people uses it. And so we started with it. So as some of you may already know, it uses Selenium WebDriver under the hood, as many other automation or E2E testing frameworks do. And once we started doing our tests and they started growing, we realized that they were slow. They were long and verbose, hard to write, hard to debug. And Protector suggests to use the page object pattern, which is basically a big class or object that is going to have all of your page information, DOM objects, etc. And it quickly became bulky and hard to maintain. So it was hard. I'm not saying that Protector is a bad tool. This is just based on our experience. We had multiple issues with something that is called the Selenium Promise Manager that Protector has. Basically, the problem was that, in general, the problem that Selenium has is the timeouts or the waits, because it is detached from your application when you're testing a storefront or when you're testing a front-end application. So then it becomes hard because you don't really have a deterministic way of knowing that an asynchronous request is done. So we started tweaking the promise manager. We started trying to avoid the timeouts that we were having with the tests, but in the end, they were killing us because the tests were timing out, and we couldn't know deterministically when an asynchronous call was coming back. So then we saw Cypress. And we started analyzing the tool. We did a couple prototypes with it, and it turned out to be fantastic. So in a nutshell, Cypress works natively on the browser because it's pure JavaScript. There's no Selenium involved. And therefore, it runs on the same stack as your application. And that makes it pretty good and pretty fast. So the tests, from a code standpoint, the tests are easier to write. They look cleaner. They're easier to debug, and they're easier to maintain. They run faster than in Selenium, much faster because they run on the browser. It has a pretty nice tool that allows you to take both screenshots and videos of the execution of the tests, and that is pretty cool, especially on headless environments where you don't have access to see what's going on. We have done multiple tests, not only with Spartacus, and you can essentially test any web app as long as you can find the elements on the page. Sometimes, like for example, in back office, which is another tool from Hybris, we have some parts where the IDs or the classes of the elements are dynamic, so it becomes hard to find the elements on the page. You can also rely on data attributes, or you can like mark them with special CY attributes, and that allows Cypress to find them. So as long as you have a consistent deterministic way to find the elements on the page, you can test your application. Also, something very nice is that the headless testing works. When you want to run your test, let's say on the command line or on a Unix environment where you don't have a UI, Cypress uses XBFB to start a frame buffer and run your test there with the Chrome WebDriver, and that's pretty cool because it works. It works pretty well. And then last but not least, the tooling that Cypress has, the test runner, the time traveling, the selector playground, the dashboard, among many others, it makes it a very good end-to-end testing tool. I'm going to briefly talk a little about these four on the demo. So in a nutshell, this is a pretty nice graphic that you can find on the Cypress website. So before Cypress, with the other end-to-end testing frameworks, you had to choose either Mocha, Jasmine, QUnit, Karma, or others, plus an assertion library. Then you had to install Selenium. You had to have your agent running, plus the application that was going to communicate with it. Then choose your wrapper, either Protractor, Nightwatch. There are many others there for Java, for other languages. And now with Cypress, it's just Cypress, which is pretty simplistic, and it's pretty elegant, and it's pretty good. So there's also we have found also a few downsides, because it's not always not everything's always good. So one of the downsides, and not for us, but it can be for other teams, that is JavaScript only. So it doesn't support any other languages. You have to use either JavaScript or TypeScript for your tests. And that can be a problem for some teams. Another one is that for now it's Chrome only, so it only uses Chrome WebDriver, and Firefox is coming on the roadmap pretty soon. I think this year at some point. But if you want to do multi-browser testing, you can't. It is a somewhat new framework. It hasn't been around for long, so there's still some bugs. The adoption it's on the way. Um, there can be trust issues with it sometimes because it's new, but for us, it has turned out to be pretty good. And also the dashboard. So the dashboard, it's like a thing where you can consolidate your tests. So for example, you can do a run of your test, and then Cypress collects the results and sends it to the dashboard, which is public or can be private, depends. It's not free for enterprise projects. We are an open source project, and for us it is, but there's a limit on the runs you can do, and we do many. So for now, we're not using it. We're planning to use it in the near future. And basically, you can see this is a sample dashboard that is public on Cypress, and you can see like the runs, the details on the run, what passed, what didn't pass, the screenshots, the videos, etc., which is pretty nice. I don't know. I hope there's a lot of latency on the call, on the broadcast. This is an example of this is just a video of a run that you can just go and see on the dashboard, which is pretty cool. All right, so let's get back to presentation. So those are the downsides that we've found. Speaking a little about the kind of QA that we do in Spartacus as a whole. So whenever we're developing a feature or we are fixing a bug, we do the feature, we do our classes, our different layers, like the component, the connector, the facade, the adapter, etc. And we try to unit test all of the code. We use Karma and Jasmine, which is what comes with Angular. Once the code is unit tested, we have a code coverage that we try to keep above 80% for everything. That allows us to have a very good level of confidence that the code is properly unit tested. Once we have that, the developer issues a pull request that if we follow Git flow conventions, and that pull request is code review. And at the same time, it goes to a continuous integration pipeline that right now it is a combination of Travis and Jenkins. So Travis takes care of running all of the checks for the code, TS-lint, prettier, and the unit tests, and Jenkins takes care of the end-to-end tests that run with Cypress. The end-to-end tests that we run with Cypress, they run on a Jenkins instance, and we classify our tests in smoke tests and regression tests. So the smoke tests run pretty fast in a couple minutes, and they touch basically the main points of our application that ensure that the basic functionality is working: checkout, search, the homepage, the locality for currency, and so on. And once that is done and the PR is accepted and it's merged into our main development branch, before we do a new release, we run the regression suite for the whole release. And this is all of our end-to-end tests based on Cypress for all of the different features and functionalities of Spartacus. We don't only run this before doing a release. We have nightly jobs that are running the regressions every day, and that's how we realize if something's broken. So let's take a quick look at how we do it. So if we take a look at this is the Spartacus code base that you can find. It's open source. You can just check it out. I'm pretty sure everyone has it. So we have a project called we have in our mono repo, we have a project called Storefront App E2E Cypress. So here you can see all of our groups of tests. So under the integration folder, we classified the tests on 3 groups. We have the smoke tests, the mobile test and the regression tests. So basically, everything that we do, we test it for both mobile and desktop. And I mean, basically, all of our test files are here. You can see them as E2E spec. That's the suffix that we use as a standard. And the functionality of Cypress is pretty simple. So you have a configuration file, which is what I'm showing here, and then you specify the URL of the app that is going to test, the URL of the API that is going to test, and then some other settings that you can have. But it's all JSON. For this demo, I'm using my local only to avoid VPN issues, latency issues, and other kinds of issues. Let's start with a simple test. So for example, we have our most simple test is the homepage test. It basically does basic checks on the homepage. It checks that it loads, and that we have a title, that we have a site logo, that we have banner, etc. So I'm going to open, this is my console. This is Spartacus running. I'm going to open Cypress here. So I have an alias that is going to run cy:\open, and that's going to open the test runner in a bit. So this is our test runner. Here you can see the test classified by folders, and this basically what it does is whenever I run the homepage test, is going to open a Chromium instance and is going to run the homepage test inside Cypress. So we're gonna see that working. So this is my app in the center. This is the test runner on the left. It's starting to, that's it, it ran. The cool thing about this is that you can see all of the different steps that we have that are specified here. So this is following like a very standard test notation. So it should display the title. We have a CY object that encapsulates all of the Cypress API. And we have convenience functions like title, which checks the page title, HTML title. We have gets that allows you to use like jQuery-like selectors to pick things from the DOM by class, by tag name, by ID, etc. And then we have shoot statements that allow you to check assertions. So for example, here we're checking that the site logo is visible, that the element called cxPageLot, which is a tag, section1, which is a class, and then a CX banner inside it is there. So if this element cannot be found, then the test is going to fail, and so on. So, and then when you go to your runner, here, not here, here, you have the time travel stuff or utility. You can see that you can time travel. So you can go to any point on your test, and then you have a static DOM version on the of what's going on the browser while this is happening, which is pretty awesome. So when you run the site logo test, it's already loaded. The page is already loaded. Whenever you want to check if there's a splash banner, the page is also already loaded, and so on. So, and then you also have the DOM playground. So for example, this is the selector that I was talking about, CH page load, site logo, etc. You can see that it's highlighted on my right here. This is the element I'm looking for. And then, like for example, you have this nice utility that is called the DOM selector, on which if I want to do CX page, I'm sorry, it's a dash CX page dot, sorry, slot dot. So this is when I do CH page lot, it's all that. And then when I do site logo, it's only that element here. And that's pretty cool. So you can play with the DOM selector to find things on the test itself. And then, like for instance, if you want to use the inspector, you can just click on things, and then you can have a suggested selector for your test, and you can use that, which is pretty awesome. So that's the second utility of Cypress, the DOM selector, which is pretty, the DOM playground, which is pretty cool. And now let's take a look at a more complex test. So like, for example, for the checkout, we have, we want to test the checkout flow on both mobile and desktop. So we have the desktop test, which is this one. If you can see it, it's pretty clean. We have something that we want to do before the test, which is cleaning the session storage. And then we have all of these checkout visit homepage, checkout register user, checkout go to cheap product details page, and so on. This is how we centralize the functionality of the test, because we want to avoid repetition as much as possible. So for that, we use a helper. This checkout variable is what we call a helper. And if you go to the helper, you can see all of the different aspects of the test, when all of the different selections and assertions and all of the things that we want to do with it for both the desktop and the mobile. So if you go to the mobile, the only difference is that we changed the viewport for the width and height of a mobile browser. And then we just run the same, pretty much the same assertions, because it's a bit different for the checkout on mobile, because the menu is different. We have hamburger on mobile and we don't have it on desktop. So that would be a difference, but everything else is pretty much the same steps. So if we go to the runner, I hope you can see this in a proper way, and we run the checkout flow test, you can see that it's going to register a user. It's going to go to the homepage. It's going to register a user that we have. It's a randomly generated user. It's registered. And then it goes to the product details page. It adds something to the cart. It logs in, because you can add, we don't have guest checkout enabled. It populates the shipping address form. It picks a shipping method. It fills up the credit card information, and it places an order. And then the last step that we have, it's to actually verify for that order. And that's something I disable on purpose. So it's trying to get the order history table, but it won't find it because it's not enabled for now. So this is how you detect that that I run failed. So you can see that the message is pretty clear. So it expected to find element blah, but it couldn't find it, so it failed. And that's how you can check that the test run failed. And you can see that you can see which step failed and with which selector in this case, which is pretty cool. Last but not least, here on this console here, I have an alias to run the tests in a headless way. So whenever you run, basically we do cy run smoke, which is going to run in a headless mode. It basically starts an electron based buffer or instance, and then it starts doing the same thing that we saw on the visual browser, on the visual runner. So it starts running. You can see how long it took for each one of the tests, and then you can see the failure. You can see the same message in a headless way. This is going to basically show up in your logs, and with the help of the dashboard, you can have this on a visual environment on which your team can go and take a look at the tests and take a look at the runs and see the video and see what happens. And this is pretty much what we do. That's all I'm showing today. I think I have 5 minutes for questions.
Yeah, there have been questions on the chat. I think most of them have been answered, but you might want to look at it after you've finished.
Okay. Then
Question, do we allow for people to unmute, or is it only through chat to ask questions?
Oh, well, I think
we can. People can ask, submit their questions.
Yeah, we can just ask them asynchronously to move on to the next presentation. I think.
Cool.
Well, thanks everyone.
So I appreciate if you answer the poll quickly, and I will run the video in a few seconds.
Hey everybody, and welcome to this episode of Sparta-Town. I'm Bill Marcotte, the product manager for Spartacus, and I'm here to give you a quick update on what we've released recently and what's coming down the road. So just to recap of what's been happening, in mid-November we published our 1.3, which contained new features like Assisted Service Module, ASM, Qualtrics, Anonymous Consent, Self-Configuration, and more. Just recently, we published our 1.4, which includes features like wishlist, back-in-stock notification, and many performance improvements, and much more as well. We have a release candidate out for 1.5 that includes variants, context-driven services, save for later feature, and again, there's more there. And our next big release after that is 2.0, a new major, primarily to include Angular 9 and accessibility features, and more also coming. We chronicle all our release information on our documentation site. There's a page for what's been released and another page for what's part of release candidates. So quick overview of some of the highlights for 1.4, since that's what's new since last time we had a Sparta-Town. So architecture highlights include many performance improvements, so scopes for product loading, which allows for data to be loaded in specific ways so that you speed up loading of anything related to products. Deferred and above the fold loading so that information is only loaded when needed, and optimizations for dealing with CMS components. We added improvements to extensibility with stacked outlets, which permits an outlet reference multiple times. And token revocation is a security update that corresponds to an improvement that was added to 1905 that revokes a security token for the person who's logging in for when they log out. And again, all this information is documented on the website. From a customer-facing feature point of view, we have wishlist, back-in-stock notification, and cancellations and returns. Just to note that cancellations and returns, although included in Spartacus 1.4, it requires the 2005, the upcoming May 2020 release of SAP Commerce. So although the feature is in Spartacus, the APIs haven't been publicly released yet, so you can't use it, but it's there. So quick overview of some of these new features. So wish list works like you think it would. When you're on a page for a product, you can add something to your wish list instead of adding to cart. And then later on, you can see what's in your wish list. And from there, you can add something from the wish list to your cart, and you can also remove it from the wish list. Pretty simple, great feature. Back in stock notification is another kind of wish list. When something's out of stock, you can tell Spartacus or you can tell SAP Commerce to remember that you want to be notified when this product is back in stock. So in this case, here's a product that has no stock. And if you click Notify Me, it gets added to your My Interests page, which you can see what's in your interests and you can remove it. But more importantly, when the product is back in stock, you'll get an email notifying you or an SMS message, depending on how it's configured, notifying you that the product is back in stock. Cancellations and returns. So if you were able to see cancellations and returns, if you had the new API, you would see that there's a new tab here for returns. And when you go into an order and you go to the bottom for items that haven't been delivered yet, you would see a cancel button. And once you click that, you'd be able to specify the quantities of items you want to cancel, and then your order would be updated, and the process works the same for returns. So what's happening for the 1.5 release? And why do we call it a release candidate? Well, release candidate is when we declare a release to be feature complete, and we're just doing tests and bug fixes. So since we just released the release candidate or just published it, we expect that in 1 or 2 weeks we'll publish the final 1.5.0. In the meantime, though, you can safely try it out and use the features. So some of the highlights of what's going in 1.5 are support for variants and the apparel store, customer coupons, save for later, group skipping, context-driven services, and consistent display of applied promotions. And again, all this information is on our site with links to the corresponding SAP Commerce features. Couple of notes about these new features. So for example, if you were to display the apparel store, you'd see that if an item has multiple variants, so for example, it's a hat that has different colors or different sizes, you would see these show up in search or category listings. And of course, when you're on a product page, you'll be able to choose the color and size that you want to add to cart. And what this really does is it goes to a different URL as soon as you choose something. And then whenever it makes sense to display variant information, so for example, obviously in the cart or in checkout, the variant information that you selected shows up in the product description. Our variant implementation, of course, works only with the out-of-the-box sample data, and if you have different variants set up, you can configure Spartacus to accommodate your differences fairly easily. Save for later is a really cool feature where when you go to checkout, if you decide that you want to make your purchase, but maybe there's one or two things that you don't want to buy right now, but you don't want to lose them, you can click the Save for Later link, and then it creates kind of another wish list that shows up at the bottom, and that way you don't lose the item or forget about the item. And this is a great way to improve conversion. Simple feature, but well executed. Customer coupons is a way for customers to see coupons that have been assigned to them, let's say by a customer support person, or perhaps they responded to an ad and they were able to claim a coupon that's going to get added to their profile. So what you're seeing here is an example of a list of the coupons that are assigned to me. And if I clicked on the Find Products button, I would see all the products that are related to that coupon. Otherwise, these coupons work just like any other. You can enter the code or choose from a list when you go to checkout. Great feature. And finally, the first of many accessibility features, group skipping made it into 1.5. So how this works is if you press on the tab key while the cursor is inside the address bar, you get this skip to menu that comes up, and you keep pressing tab, and it allows you to jump to a specific portion of the page by repeatedly pressing tab. So I mentioned briefly our 2.0 release. So this is a new major. There will be some dev work needed to do an update because we're going to be introducing breaking changes. Usually when you update to a new minor or a new patch, we expect that there won't be any problems with your code and our updates. But with a 2.0 or a new major, there will be, but we expect that the upgrade shouldn't take that long. The big push in 2.0 is adoption of Angular 9, which is a great update to the framework. There's the Ivy rendering engine, which provides faster performance, smaller file sizes, and many more benefits. So we want to get Spartacus on Angular 9 as soon as Angular 9 is released. Accessibility, rest of the keyboarding features are also a big important feature for our 2.0. And there's other features that we're working on. Depending on timing, we'll make it into 2.0, possibly a later release. So an event system, a new way to manage sessions for identity providing, or for supporting identity providers, removal of ng bootstrap from our code and things like that. And we'll update our roadmap page as these goals are finalized. And again, our pre-release information and roadmap information are available from our website. In summary, a lot of great stuff coming. We'd love to hear your feedback, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Bill. And our next presenter is Tobias, talking about deferred loading. With no further ado, take it over, Tobias.
Yeah, I'll do. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Farzin?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right, cool. And you can see my screen as well, I guess.
Correct.
All right, I'm here to talk about deferred loading and above default loading. Two concepts, two features we brought to Spartacus 1.4 lately, and they are related. And so I'll talk about them kind of separately, but do remember that above defaulting will depend on deferred loading, while deferred loading itself can be used individually. So what is the problem we're trying to solve here? Basically, when you when you launch a page in Spartacus, we're building up the full page in one go. So we're getting all the page structure data, component data, and we're building all those components, even though they might be below the viewport. So the viewport, I have a visual here of a mobile device, and the viewport is basically what you see on the screen. But as you can imagine, this is like a very slick storefront with only 5 components in the viewport in this wire. But there will be content below the fold. So below this line, basically, or below this line actually, or next to this line, there might be other components. And when you scroll down or scroll up, those components will be shown. So this is like components below the fold. And as soon as I scroll down, these components will be loaded. And the problem we have with the former Spartacus version is that we would create and load all those components initially. And the same goes for hidden components. So in this example, you see that I've clicked on the hamburger menu, and on mobile, it's the kind of a traditional pattern. If I click on the hamburger menu, there's a flyout menu, and there might be navigation items, my account items, context menus for changing the language and currency, what have you. And they are all sitting behind an interaction with the user. So there's actually no need to load them up front, but we actually did this all the time. And this is what you do see a lot on the web in storefronts today as well. A variation of this one is a carousel. In this carousel, there are like more items or more slides on the right-hand side, or let's say outside of the viewport. And typically, if you use the carousel indicators or the next and previous buttons, you will see other components coming into the viewport. And there's actually not so much a need to load them up front. So you could potentially, and I'm explicitly saying potentially because we haven't done this one, that will require a change in a carousel, but potentially you could defer loading those slides or components as well. And then another disadvantage, if we do not have, if we would all bring those components in the experience from the start, that these components will also load additional data. So the flyout menu for the hamburger menu will basically load the navigation components with some backend data. It will go and load some languages and currencies. And similarly, the carousel will load some product data. And obviously, a lot of those components here in the bottom will load banners and images and whatsoever. So there's a lot of network consumption going on. And this is what we're trying to solve with deferred loading and above default loading. So before I explain how we did it and how you can enable this in your project, let's first see it in action. Fingers crossed there. So I've created a brand new storefront this morning based on the latest release candidate 1.5, which we released yesterday. And I haven't enabled above default loading, nor have I enabled deferred loading. So just to demonstrate, let me just reload this guy. So reloading the experience here. And if I go to my network tab and if I search for languages, for example, you see that we have done a call for the languages, which is sitting behind this button, right? So there's actually no need to do this, and this is one of the things we're solving. Similarly for the currencies, same thing happens there. And also, if I go into my my layers, that's a nice feature of the Chrome DevTools. I can have a look at the full loaded page, regardless of the viewport. So I can just look at whatever is in this page. And as you can see, the full page has been loaded from top to bottom. And what we want to do here with this deferred loading and above default loading is making sure that we would try to defer loading of these components which are not in the viewport. And also we want to make sure that the language, for example, not being loaded up front. So I'll make a quick change in my code. So as I said, I have here a very clean app module. I only loaded this B2C storefront module. I've just moved out the configuration here because it's a little bit cleaner to look at for you guys. And I'll enable this code. Let me import all my dependencies there. Oops. Import all. So what I'm basically doing, I'm using the configuration module, which you probably know, and I'm applying a deferred strategy here. It's like a new configuration we've added here. There's also an intersection margin, which I will talk a little bit about later. Saving my file, and this is, by the way, all type save in the layout configuration. So this one you probably have used already if you've done Spartacus. So I guess I've already reloaded my experience, so maybe I clear out my network tab. So maybe just do it again. So reloading my page here, and let's wait a little till the full page is loaded. So to begin with, my expectation here is that if I hit my my hamburger menu, that we will see a few network requests here coming in because I've cleared it. So we should at least have a request for the language and the currency, and likely also one for the navigation. So there you go. So this is instantly what we're doing here is that we are creating those components. And in addition, we're loading these components will basically request data, and that data is loaded as well. Let me add this a low all, and you see that we have like the language selector with the languages, the currency selector with the currencies, etc. And those navigations have been loaded with all the data. Additionally, if we go to that cool layer tool, you'll see also that we now see that from the full experience, we've only loaded the header, the hero component, and some other banners. So all the components which are basically in the viewport. And if you look at the bottom, it's all empty. I've added a little dotted line for each page slot. I'll come back to that one later. But this shows you what kind of page slots are deferred here. And if I start scrolling now, and you should carefully look at this area, you will see that if we are coming close to the viewport, and that's actually the 50 pixel margin you might have seen in my configuration before. If I come close, you see that the next bunch of components will come in. And I can also move you here to the network tab. If I keep on scrolling, you'll see that additional data, like images, for example, will come in. And there will be, like in this case, a lot of requests for data, like the carousels are kind of heavily and urgently looking for product data. And this will keep going. If I scroll down, there are some other images coming up. And there's the last one is the footer navigation, which is also being requested separately. If you have paid attention, you have also seen that, and let me refresh this one. If I refresh my browser, if you know our CMS structure a little bit, then you might be surprised to see the cookie banner consent dialog, because this guy sits actually in the bottom of the page. Physically, it's stored in the footer slot. It's a component in the footer slot, but with the CSS applied to it, it's basically added to the viewport. And this is kind of difficult because the component doesn't sit in the DOM of the viewport. It's only with the CSS. So for this reason, we've added a kind of a component specific loading strategy where we say this component will be instantly loaded regardless. All right, I think that went pretty well. So let's see how this works. So I'm going to a few nitty-gritty details, maybe not too interested. I mean, later on, if we see how we enable it, that you don't need to know this, but I think it's actually interesting to know. So to begin with, for deferred loading, it's not so difficult. We are leveraging the intersection observable API, intersection observer API, and this is shipped with all modern browsers today. So there's actually quite good browser support. And if there's no browser support, we will silently ignore it. And this will basically result in showing all the full DOM anyway. So then there's no notion of deferred loading. But if we do have access to the intersection observer API, then we're basically observing when an element has intersect the API, intersect the viewport. And as soon as that happens, we will then start loading this component. And as I said before, you have this additional margin, which we can specify. And I think in my configuration I set it to 50 pixels, but it's like up to you what you want to use there. This is basically there to kind of predictively add stuff into the viewport or load it up front. Maybe I shouldn't use that word predictive, because predictive loading is another strategy I'm super interested to add later to Spartacus, but that's not what we're doing now. Okay, on top of that, we do not use this pattern for SSR. So SSR, server-side rendering, basically means that you will expose your full page into, let's say, Google or Pinterest or Instagram, what have you. And whenever we use SSR, we will ignore the intersection observer. We will just load the data anyway. Going forward, we might introduce some bot detection that if the SSR is used by a real user through a real browser, then we could still consider using intersection observer, but for the moment, we're not doing that. And then this is the one with the consent management dialog, where we're basically ignoring the deferred loading. So there's the notion of a loading strategy per CMS component. So if you've ever done a CMS component mapping in Spartacus, that's the area where you can also specify the loading strategy. So I think that's pretty straightforward also to explain. Lazy loading is, or sorry, above default loading is actually much more difficult. So why is above default loading so complex? So to begin with, all the browsers have a different viewport. You have different orientations like landscape or portrait. And you can use, you can zoom in the experience. So the page fold even depends on how the user is using the browser. So there's definitely no real static idea of where is my page fold. That really depends. Then on top of that, the business user who's managing the content of the page, he can really do different stuff. So he could create new banners, new components today without a new deployment, without a new developed application. So the page fold is super dynamic. It really depends on what is done before the fold and after the fold. And the last but not least, the height of these slots where we render the components is also very fluid. It's depending on the content. It's also depending on the style of the the components. So imagine you're running two sites on the same implementation of Spartacus. Then there might be different styles, and the styles could also influence the size of the components. So in order to fix this, what we've done is we've basically said, okay, we need a configuration of an indication of the page fold. So what you see here is if I've configured in Spartacus this page slot to be the indicated page fold. Means this will be the last slot, which what I expect on the above the page fold. And all the other page slots, I'm expecting them to be loaded later. It's an indication, so if I'm wrong, it's not a problem. Or if the user has a different size of the window, it's not a problem. We will load them eventually anyway. But you could say that basically these above the fold slots will always be prioritized. And this is how you could do that. So in your layout configuration for each page template, you can basically specify the page fold. So in this case, I've set it to section 2A, which is one of our landing page slots. And then what we do with pure CSS, we basically say all the other slots which are below the page fold, configured page fold slot, will all be moved down the page fold. And we simply do this by a margin top with 100 view height. So that's a native CSS rule, which is pretty convenient. So as long as the page, these guys are pending, which means the components inside these slots haven't been loaded, then we basically move all the pending slots to the bottom. And as soon as all these slots are done, then we will move them up. So we basically remove the CSS rule. And if at that point in time we were quite right with the indication of the page fold, everything goes well, and we have the right thing. But if maybe the first page slot is still in the viewport, then that's also fine, because then that page slot will basically be loaded anyway. So it's kind of transparent for the developer. So how to add that, and I'll have a look later on the questions, if any, how to add the magic. So basically you've seen me doing this already. The first thing you would do is you apply the deferred loading strategy. So we haven't added this as a default configuration in Spartacus 1.4. We might do that later with a 2.0 release, but it's easy enough to add. That's the first thing you need. And secondly, you need to have this Caledon theme. So that's the CSS theme. Be sure that you add it before you import the storefront styles. Actually, I made a mistake here because this is our internal configuration, but you would do import at Spartacus/styles/index from the node modules folder. Be sure that you add the theme before you do the import of the Spartacus styles. And by adding the Caledon theme, you're basically getting our page fold CSS, which contains some of the magic I've just showed you with moving the page slots below the fold with the 100 page height. And here's a little example where I show you how we basically use instant loading for the anonymous consent management banner component. So just to make sure that the anonymous consent banner is moving into the viewport regardless of the physical position in the DOM or in the page slot structure. This stuff is pretty well documented. So you can go to our documentation/performance. There you will see these two items, or just Google Deferred Loading Spartacus documentation. You will also end up here. So you can have a read after this Sparta-Town. And let's see, a time check. I think I have a few more minutes, so maybe I'll just give you an update on where we are with several performance topics. So as you can see, we added a whole bunch of performance topics. And why I'm showing you this, I just want to make you aware that above default loading and deferred loading is part of a bigger story. So at the moment, we're still loading the full page structure for every page, which means that even though we apply deferred loading or above default loading patterns, we will still load initially the full page structure. And so we're having plans to break up the full page structure in smaller chunks so that we can benefit more and more. Because currently, if you do deferred loading or above default loading, still all the components will be loaded when we load the pages. It's just that we don't compose the components, and these components will not do any additional loading of data. So we will benefit a lot from the fact if we apply also the breakup of CMS page structure and CMS components. And that's this guy basically. And if we go there, then we will also start leveraging e-text so that if we revisit a page, and if we have the exact same page structure, there's no need, for example, to reload components. And also there's no need to get all the data over the network because e-texts are basically there to prohibit us from that. So there are a whole bunch of optimizations we're planning on. Another really nice one is this native lazy loading for images, which is coming to browsers quite soon. There's already 62% of global users who would benefit from that. So that's a very small improvement we could do, and so on and so forth. So yeah, let me have a look at the questions, or you can unmute yourself, or I'm not sure, Farzin, who you want to do that, but I'll stop sharing and look at the questions.
Yes, please look at the questions. In the meantime, I'm launching another poll for this and for the whole Sparta-Town. Thank you very much. I'm sharing my screen again. So I had a typo about our next session, which is in March. March 19 is our next webinar for Spartacus. And in the same months of March, we have another Sparta-Town. Still, if you have any question, we still have a few more minutes. You can post your question. If not, you can always reach us on Slack channel and then post your question there. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you to the presenters, and we wish you a good day and time ahead, and hope to see you again soon.
All right, thanks everybody. Thanks for seeing.